Hello, everybody. It's Laura Eisenhower. I'm so excited to introduce a wonderful friend, Leigh J. McCloskey, who really changed my life when I met him. Gosh, probably sometime in 2010 when I was living in Ventura, California. I visited his home in Malibu, California. And I know I'm not the only one that said it's the eighth wonder of the world, if not the wonder of the world, to see the amazing art, visual philosophy that this man has created, and has an incredible story behind how this inspiration came about. And I'll obviously ask him to share a bit about that. But I want to read off his bio a bit. In many ways, Leigh J. McCloskey is a modern Renaissance man. His interest, knowledge, study, and learning ranges from art, music, history, religion, mythology, Philo-Sophia, and esotericism, if I'm saying that right, to string theory, quantum physics, and the multidimensional nature of consciousness. He has deeply studied Hermeticism, Alchemy and Kabbalah, and has hosted twice weekly philosophical salons at his home, which I have attended. And one of my big passions is talking about Christ-Sophia and bringing this awareness and blueprint out, and seeing it visually is the ultimate activation, I have to say. He lectures both nationally and internationally, and has given numerous talks and presentations of his holographic art and visual philosophy. He's contributed numerous essays on topics ranging from William Blake and the heroic imagination, the Archetypal Tarot and the Kabbalah, to Jacob Boehme and Theosophical thought. Leigh's artwork toured with the Rolling Stones and most recently with Flying Lotus for his album Cosmogramma. He also continues to collaborate with other artists, filmmakers, musicians as well. And he is also an accomplished actor whose professional career has spanned 4 decades. I actually used to watch you, Leigh, when I lived in England with my grandmother, and we watched Dallas, and I was really blown away when I met you in person, realizing, wow, this was Mitch Cooper that I used to watch when I was like 12 years old. And just some, really great movies. His life and works reveal remarkable artistry, vision, and discipline, and are a reminder that we are far more interesting than we have led ourselves to believe. He founded Olandar Foundation for Emerging Renaissance, which is OFFER, offer, as a seed idea meant to awaken our deepest knowing and to stimulate the emerging waters of imaginative renaissance and rebirth and welcome home. And it's just incredible because I just can't think of greater soul medicine than to understand who we are through art. And I just want to ask you a little bit about how this explosion of creativity came through you to create the home that you have, and describe maybe your upstairs and what this is all about when people enter your home.
My art really mirrors a great deal of what I believe is the development of our human journey from a type of psychological need to make sense of an inner turmoil that has no language, has no image, and we don't know what it is. And in a way, these things drove me. I started having nightmares when I was about 14 through maybe 23. I had sleep paralysis, lucid dreams, out-of-body experiences. I was inundated by my unconscious. Essentially, I had to make sense of it. And my natural born love was acting. And theater really gave me an opportunity to embody other people, other ways of seeing the world. And so they really taught me about not just my own point of view, but other points of view. And that's why my art essentially came from my life as an actor. I was studying at Juilliard in New York in the early 70s. And my father, who was a painter, and I'd always drawn, I'd always journaled with drawing, but I never thought of myself as an artist. My dad was the artist, I was the actor. And so I asked him, I said, well, should I study art? I'm really interested. And he gave me the best advice. He said, no, don't study. He felt he was overtrained. He really told me to observe. And I started to use painting as a way of connecting with energy. And I had a very difficult part to play, but I wanted to murder my father as the character. And I just could not find it energetically. I could find it up here, but I couldn't find it. I couldn't find the fierceness. And that's when I, by fortune or by synchronicity, I saw a calligrapher talk about breath and gesture and the connection to the emotion, so that what you see with a calligraphic gesture is essentially a musical, rhythmic quality. And I thought that's very much like acting, finding the emotional truth of something. So I began using paint and medium as a way of connecting with energy. And for that part, I started throwing paint using my body because I felt very disconnected. But I realize now, in looking back at it, I went back to a much more primal relationship with the creative spirit, because I wasn't looking for an identity. I was looking for tools to not go insane, essentially, to not give in to despair, to not feel trapped. And I really feel like that's what people don't understand about art. They think it's an illustration or it's something pretty. Art is what we do to navigate despair. It's what we do to not collapse into essentially the darkness of what our inner demons might be telling us. You know, and this is the great key, because when we see this, and especially with my art now, because I didn't start out, it was never a type of profession. It was never an outer life relationship. I would always ask questions with my art. And the same thing with when you saw Dallas, I was being richly rewarded, essentially by the culture. You've succeeded, how wonderful. And I couldn't bite the hand that fed me. It allowed me to move to this house. But I realized in that moment, I say, Leigh, if you're going to not make your conversation about what's wrong or what's missing in Hollywood or why they're not making the films they should be, why don't you take this opportunity to begin to grow something? And you talked about my discussion group. So in 1981, but 38 years ago, I began discussion groups every Tuesday and then Thursday night. For 25 years, I had a Theosophy discussion group. And to balance that, then I had a Western inner tradition on Thursday, looking at Jung and Alchemy and Hermeticism and all of these conversations that people want to have, but we have no place to have them. You know, and so my home became the place where, well, at least here, let's have these conversations. Let's honor these things that maybe the world doesn't have time for, but we're more of what we would call gardeners of the soul, meaning we realize at some point things are not going to be grown against other things. They're going to be grown because we become the custodian of what really matters. And that's one of the reasons why my questions went deeper and deeper. And I spent 17 years revisioning the tarot. My work on tarot revisioned, which in the introduction, I also have written 7 books. And I think the great book is the Tarot Revision, because it's this culmination of, as an actor, embodying, going through not the illustration of something, but what is archetype? Why are we wired the way we are? And so that then wedded, in a way, spending 17 years, because I began the tarot in the mid-'80s, and I spent the next 17 years, really until about the turn of the century and the collapse of the World Trade Center. There was a very marked transition. And in a sense, there's also a prophecy in my work, which is very interesting, because the world archetype that I created in 1986 is dated 9/11. And 9/11 then, with the world, is the triggering of Saturn, the falling away of the twin erections of money and God, the false towers of Babel that are saying, I have more than you do. And this collapse, and when you talk about the studio, this is really what happened then on 9/11/2001, when I began painting the floor of my studio. I didn't think it was going to become what it became, but it did announce itself inwardly to me, calling itself the hieroglyph of the human soul. When something tells you it's the hieroglyph of the human soul, you keep it quiet because you sound like you're crazy. So luckily it was my home, and my dear friends that would come see Leigh painting his floor, beginning to paint his couch, sort of nodding compassionately, thinking maybe he's actually lost his marbles. Realized that it was that sense of going through, and I feel like that's why art isn't really about the artist. It mirrors the deeper creative truth of our greater consciousness, because art is not an instruction, it is an inspiration. It is meant to leaven, to allow us to, in a way, alleviate our anxieties with a sense of a deeper beauty or a more meaningful story. And that's why the relationship, or the revelation then, of the collapse of the World Trade Center on 9/11, the beginning of this hieroglyph, the human soul, which really burst out of me like a musical riff. And it's the watcher language is what it called itself. And it's this reoccurring figure over and over and over again. And you start to see, as you look closely into what became, of course, unbeknownst to me, but it is also multidimensional. He put on 3D glasses. And that blew my mind, because it's actually talking about, because myth and symbol, all of these things that we so love, Sophia, Christos, all of these qualities can seem, well, it's a lovely study, but what's the point? Do you know, in other words, how does that actually change anything? And what I realized the art was doing, because again, this is a home where we gather every week. So think of a place of community that has to gather in private, because the world doesn't care about these things. And as a matter of fact, if we talk about them too much, they become bothered by these things. In other words, don't talk like this. But I think that's why this is and has become the revelation that the last key is intimate. It's not where are you going, but what you love. You must stand your ground. And that's, of course, why this called itself an ark in the beginning. It said that the last flood was water. This flood is information. So this was to build a philosophical seed ark. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but it was the truth that as my house sits at the ocean, essentially, there's no further to go. We've come clear across the country. That's the symbolism. And the symbolism is not applied like, oh, this represents something. It's really much more ancient or shamanic, looking at the very conversation of the earth herself. I live on Shumash land, the agency. My house is at the end of the journey. There's no further to go. And the question is, in this story, is, well, why have we gone through all of this? And now that if it is about intimacy, where do I ask the questions from? What do I honor? And that's why on 9/11, I illustrate it this way. We could see Michelangelo on the scaffolding shouting at the Pope, screaming at God. In a way, the vaulted sense of the importance of how much we think our thoughts matter. You know, this rage against it. And that this brings the ego out of us, because it's 500, 600 years of, you know, in a way, this defiance against this implacable God. You know, I will write like Beethoven. But if we think of this finally bringing us each to a unique home, and it's really brilliant because the hieroglyph of the human soul, or the acronym Thoth, Thoth's library, tells us, because it's painted on linoleum, if we think symbolically, that our truth is not painted on gold. In a way, the truth of who we are is, what do we do with the ordinary? And this is why the arts are so important. Because a person says, listen, I can't get out of my despair, but I can write the blues. I can sing. You know, this is what I love. I love this when I'm in Ireland or different countries where you go, that's, of course, it's always raining. It's not about stopping the rain. It's always difficult. You can't get out of that. But it's what you do with that. And that's why I feel this last cycle, especially with my work, because my work on tarot, and tarot means wheel. You think of a wheel coming full circle. This sense of having taken a great journey across the ages, this development of a human ego, coming finally full circle to the hieroglyph of the human soul, or my house, which has 3 levels, above, below, and in between, like we do. And this is really amazing, because above, you'd say, up here is the imagination. But the legs below are structured. They keep us planted. And when we're at home, we don't want to run from our responsibilities. And we want to enjoy our imagination. But the in-between in this narrative is the domestic, meaning the story of I love these people. And that was really what triggered for me. It was my love of Carla, my wife, and my daughters. I realized on 9/11, I had a profound feeling that what was happening had happened before, and that it was essentially the end of things. And so my great despair, as I think so many of us felt as the people were jumping out of the windows, that they didn't want more. They didn't want the Lehman Brothers' promise of a greater portfolio. They wanted to hold their daughter. They wanted to kiss their son or their husband. They wanted to be with their wife, you know, walking along a river. They didn't want what they thought they wanted. And it wasn't just one of us, it was all of us. Do you know this millennial sense of, we're almost to the top of things, darling. From here, I am all of this. But then there's a sudden collapse. And this is what's happened inside of us. And this is what the hieroglyph is saying. we're on our knees. We've fallen off the scaffolding. No longer Michelangelo shouting at Pope and God, but actually looking at our wife, looking at those we love and saying, while we're here, let's do something that honors one another. And that's the thing my home has always been. Olandar, which is the name of my home, has always been a place that has said, welcome. You are not judged here. Because I take my marching orders from theater, which is when we get together, it's a rehearsal process. I have your back. I'm not going to let you be made a fool of. And by the time we're ready to share it, we'll all be excelling because we'll be trusting one another's performance rather than judging each other. This is really where I'm trying to get to. So it's a very long-winded, but it's a passion in me. I feel such a sense of even the library itself wanting to embrace us.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's just incredible to hear. And I mean, it was life-changing for me coming to your house because, I mean, like you said, the floor, the bookcases, the lamp, the couch, everything, the ceiling. I mean, there's no limitation of a canvas, but yet, you know, there's still, you know, paintings that blend right in that, you know, are on canvases as well. Plus, you know, the wheel and, you know, the phoenix with, I mean, okay. So just to everybody who is hearing all this, there is a lot of videos that I will be sharing. So you can take a tour of Leigh's, just artistry in his upstairs and you know, what he has been able to give us so far, you know, through videos and the photographs that are there. So you can, you know, fully see to the extent of what we're talking about here. And yes, putting on the 3D glasses, the whole place comes to life. And we're talking like all these different archetypes of the goddess and the Christ energy. And when I was visiting, you know, there was, you were working on the Lilith painting and you're sitting right behind or right in front of the mother. You call it the in pink.
Yeah, Revelations in Pink.
Revelation in Pink. The mothership, yeah. Can you just, while you're just right there with that painting, just give us a little bit of description of some of the symbology and just.
Yeah, well, this is one of the important things that so often we think, again, art is illustrating what we think we know, but it never is. It is much more like a jazz musician leaning into the riff and the music becoming the mentor. And the better the music, the more you go with it. And that's really the nature of my painting, because I'm not illustrating anything. That's why when you talk about the feminine divine, the goddess energy, the Christ, these things that have come up have not been even part of my, let's say, my wiring. Oh, I have to talk about these things. My third book is called Adam Reborn and Eve Restored, a romance in 2 parts. And that's when I was drawing forth Eve. She told me this remarkable, really profound story about the deep love of universal Adam and the beloved Eve. And it talks about the deeper nature of the divine feminine. Almost you'd say it restores, as the rest of this art does, the story that can only be told in intimacy. If it's told in institution or in religion or in proof of something, it has to be defended. But when it's like a blossom, the flower says, I'm vulnerable, but I'm beautiful. So if you need to be wicked, move along. This is for those that want to lean over and go, how lovely. And that's why Mothership, Revelations in Pink, is, again, not something I thought I would set out to paint. I painted an orb. I was photographing orbs back in about 2003 for about 3 or 4 years. In the studio, they were spiraling about in these remarkable shapes. And my dad, being a painter, said, if you can't talk about something, paint it. And I am done with debate over what things are or aren't. I want to use them as triggers as to explore the nature of, well, how do they inspire? Like you'd say, music isn't true or false, so that's a wrong proposition, but music is far more interesting than fact. So we have to exercise these other ways to inquire. So Mothership emerges. And she begins to tell me this story. She says, I am matter, mater, mother. I'm the knowledge of your atoms. There are no evil atoms. If you don't like your stories, tell better stories. Because you must see through the eyes of the mother. I love all of my children. I love you. And so she has in the belly the story of the apple. You know, you wonder, well, what is that? What's the apple? Well, the apple is this reoccurring motif I was not expecting to have emerge, but I asked about it. And this is the first principle. This is what Mothership teaches. She says the first principle is life, not math, not time, not distance, not space. That's your Western tradition. You never start anymore from your own tree or where you live. You start one side, you're outside of the gate. No wonder you don't like yourself. You're never home. And so she says, I don't want my revelation for you to be in black and white. Because let me guess, you're the hero and they're bad guys. I'm done with black and white. The black and white are the keys of the piano. I need you to turn that into music for me, because I'm the mother. So I love all the books in the library. I love all of my stories. And whether you recognize it as important or not, even what you don't like, even what's dark and dreadful, is still part of my weave. I am matter, mater, mother. If you looked inside of your body, you might look at your pancreas and go, whoa. But it's doing you a service. You see, that's why she's saying you are holy, holy. You are holographic. And what's extraordinary about this image is it's very large, but it's also, she says, my crown are not jewels. They're tears. And as you return home, you must make sense of the sorrows of the human story, because these are your living waters. You cannot find forgiveness in your neighbors. You must grow a garden and bring the waters of forgiveness home. And this is why intimacy is so important. This is why, if we think about this as well, I tell people this is first technology. It's a painted environment, like a painted cave. So the ancestors of every generation know this language. They interpret it differently, but it is still that which inspires. That's why, again, when we move from her into the library, we see not one book, but this conversation of all the books. And this is what the tarot teaches. When you see the 22 characters, like the 22 characters of a Shakespearean play, but then you say, well, wait a minute, then you can say this is E, A, B, C, D. Do you know these are notes on an instrument? And this is what she's trying to say. Because Revelations in Pink is, it's not enlightenment. It's lighten up, breathe, oxygenate. You can't know anything when you're panicking. And so much of this pulls us back again with a painted environment, community, a feeling of safety because it's private, meaning you're not, when you're home, you feel protected. And so this is trying to tell us about where our energies need to feel protected in order to allow these things to really be cultivated like a gardener. Like you can't grow an orchid in the wind. You know, and a lot of our question is, well, how do I pull back enough in this world that keeps pulling me out of myself? And that's why this, as she become this story that we are woven of a conversation that, and as she said, when you think as your ancients do, as your alchemists do, you will always begin with the life principle, not the math principle. And when you begin with the life principle, you'll begin to realize that we pass in the womb through the reptilian, the mammalian, the hominid, because these are as rings in a tree, meaning they are quite literally creating foundation and languages within us that allow us to carry more and more implication. Now, why this is important, you can liken this to a rose, right? That we grow from a seed through that difficult journey of creating the thorns to this bud. And the bud is, of course, constricted, the sense, I can't do this anymore. And then the season comes and begins to shift the sense of where energy is paid attention to. It's not something that's done. It's, in a way, a natural quality. That's why I think this has to do with the occurrence of something deeply natural. Because she says, you know, in a Revelation in Pink, and it's true, that she says, I'm the mother. I love all of my children. I love the right. I love the left. Stop making your story about who you hate. And this is very important because the fire came right to my front door. Carla and I stayed and fought it. But there was a fire tornado that quite literally punched me back into my house. And the fire was full of apocalyptic realization and fury, and it was angry. And so the fire is at your door. The human heart is becoming brittle and dry, knowing what it hates and forgetting what it loves. Do not look at your neighbor in hate. You will lose your community. And wherever hatred flourishes, I will bring it to its knees. And we look around from Notre Dame 170 days later. I look around here, and 170 of my neighbors are missing. Interesting. I didn't realize the same amount of days, same amount of neighbors are missing. They burned to the ground all around me. And so the fire becomes this truth, this apocalyptic fire that is on the planet now, which is forcing us. Now, this is the ark metaphor. It's forcing us to realize we must gather back into that which we love and pull our attention away from the accusation of the neighbor or the disliking of the other, because this is reflective. It's actually about self-reflection. And the Aquarian, the realization now is, like we did on 9/11, no, let me see through the eyes of my responsibility to those I love. There is no, I'm going to do it tomorrow, it'll be different. My responsibility is here and now. I am a gardener of the human soul, and my responsibility is to cultivate, not in a sense, try to change, but try to navigate the waters and begin to understand what is in the boat with me and what's in the water, which I have to navigate, but what allows me to actually say, these are my priorities. And that's the art of it for all of us. Because the artist here, and this is why the books line the walls of artists, and what they say to me continually, in a word, is everyone thinks we were famous and thought well of. We never were. To be creative in any of these times of this journey of the ego has always been very expensive. To be creative, to be imaginative, if it was not able to be sold, made one an outsider, strange, not, do you know? And we were taught over and over again, there's nothing of real value inside of you, unless you could sell it. Do you know, so we even in that became ashamed on a collective level of this creative, imaginative sense of wonder. And that's why I feel that a lot of this, like when I went on my knees, when I fell on my knees and started painting the floor, my shift of position from being, in a way, standing upright to looking down made me quite aware that we have overlooked the fact that if we are trees, which we are, and we live in Malibu, we don't try to get to Santa Monica. You know, we have this sense of I'm getting somewhere, and this was not about getting somewhere. It's about how do we finally make sense of our journey. And that's why I'm convinced she appeared again in Mothership, Revelations in Pink. Lighten up, breathe, you're home. You think you're ordinary, but it's the great gift. You are so extraordinary. You can hold your humanity and realize that it's a work of art, not a thing of shame.
Yeah. So, gosh, and this is exactly my experience every time I've been into your house. Just, you know, just the awness of it all. Just being in awe of the true essence of what it means to be human, and it brings a person into celebration. There's so much darkness all the time that's shoved in our faces. We're in a really powerful window period, which to me is that blossoming that you're talking about, that is very much in alignment with how this poured through you after, you know, 2001. And I have to say, I've been working with the tarot since, I don't know, about 20 something years. And this is one of the most intricate decks I have ever seen in my life. You don't even have to fully understand the meaning. All you have to do is look at the art and it just speaks to you. And it's so intricate. So I'll be sharing images of the deck that you created over, you said 17 years? Yeah. And you mentioned the fire. So just to bring everybody into that, I did mention in the beginning, he lives in Malibu, and I know everybody remembers the Malibu fires. And so that came, you didn't go anywhere, because I was going to ask you about just your experience. You didn't go anywhere. You're basically fighting these fires. Your home, which is one of the greatest masterpieces on this planet, was under this unbelievable threat. And, you know, just the power of intention and just all these things that you bring out in your art just spoke volumes about what the end results were, with also your granddaughter being born. So it's incredible. And I don't want to, you know, push you to speak about anything, but if there's anything you wanted to add to just that.
I would love to really bring up things that because fire is, when I opened the door downstairs, it was as if everything was in still motion. it was pitch black, and there were gold. It was really quite beautiful, gold and red embers, just like rain coming down. And then it went into fast motion, as if it just, and that's when it again shoved me into the house. And I, in an odd way, it was like putting my visor down. Something in me charged right back out. And because your only defense is a hose, essentially, and what water you have. And I was very fortunate because I have sprinklers on my roof. I had started to saturate, and the tornado was moving so quickly, it went past us. But everything, a wall of fire, quite literally, was coming down to us. And what was extraordinary was it was such a threshold experience that nature was quite literally talking to me. I could feel, and this is what I wanted to tell everyone, because a lot of people held us and Olandar in their prayers, because this is so important to them. And to really, this almost, you'd say, like the Library of Alexandria, this can't be lost. You know, and that was the outcry I felt. But I was about 2 o'clock in the morning, I was exhausted. I mean, I was just without any guard. And I heard, do you feel everyone's prayers for you and Carla and Olandar? And I did. And it was a palpable prayer for you. And this is why I really want to emphasize that so much of, like a lot of the people in your community and our community, I think these feelings are really deep and they're really shared, but we don't necessarily see that they have any effect, because the world seems to be, in a way, always this darkness, this encroaching or this devouring energy. But in that threshold moment, I realized that the truth of a prayer field is not something that is in the optics, it's in the energetic field. And I could see a dome around my house. And this is exactly how it ended up burning. It's as if a dome was placed over our house, and around it, the fires burned. And that it was not, and I even, when the fire came, there was this inner feeling of are you staying or leaving? And I told the fire staying, and it said that's all I needed to know. So it became this extraordinary, almost ballet, like going through Dante's Inferno, because by night, literally everything all around us, it was like Nero fiddling his Rome, was burning. I mean, and the fires are so bright that they're literally outlining the homes. So if they have like colonnades, they're burning, and you can see it's literally like the houses were made of flame. And it was, and then things were popping and crying and hissing, and there was this overwhelming sense that houses didn't want to be dying, but I hold the memories of all these Christmases. I love this family. And the trees were screaming, but they could not move. But I heard from my trees, this was extraordinary, it said, we are not fuel, we're guardians. And my garden said, everything in the garden wants to live. Everything that lives desires to stay alive. You're the part of the garden that's moving. We have your back. And so suddenly I didn't feel alone. I felt this sense of the very, and what's very interesting is many of the homes that survived are not cut down greenery. There's a lot of lushness, because there's this cooperative biological connection between land and home. And that's really what I felt so strongly, and what it taught me. And we were really safe, because there was no, when everyone was gone, Carla and I were completely alone. That was what was extraordinary. For about 8 hours, there were no firemen, there were no neighbors.
The roads were all closed. Everything was
all closed. So it was like being in a twilight zone. It was really it was something out of a science fiction movie, because this thing was a monster. I grew up 2 miles from here, so I've been around Malibu Fires, and I'm an old Malibu boy, and you just don't leave. You learn from your parents that you live out. You know, people think they live in the city here. They don't. You live where you can't be dependent upon other people's infrastructure. You have to figure out how to do it, or to the best degree, keep an eye on one another. And that was the disappointment, because my joke used to be, you know, that's how you met community during one of these disasters. But this time, the community fled. And that was what was very strange. And I think that's also why so many houses burned, because so many people left thinking they could come right back up, and they couldn't. They weren't allowed. So there was this fiasco, this complete, a bit like the hurricanes, where they say, oh my God, everything that could go wrong did. And that's what happened in Malibu. Every decision that was made was a mistake. Everything that was to do, like the grand exodus, the evacuation, could have been a death highway. They are so lucky that it didn't blow out over the, because they had people sitting ducks. It was just, and then the great tragedy was to see so many homes didn't burn at the first. They burned because of embers, and no one was there to see. There were no eyes, and you'd see this flickering, and then it'd explode. But the great miracle was I was up in the northeast side of my property, trying to look at flames. I could not see, luckily I couldn't see the wall of fire. I could see the smoke coming at me, but that's where a helicopter appears out of nowhere. And I almost think I'm going to die in a helicopter accident because he gets so close to me. But he lifts this thing and he just hits water. And I realized that that was the moment where this wall of fire, it kind of broke its back and it forced the fire to go around us. So this is where I do feel that miracles are not something big. They're all sorts of small things. And it taught me, like Odysseus in the Odyssey, right? That you don't go to find a Cyclops. It's just you get to the island and one's there. And the question is, well, what do I do now? And that it's trying, I think the mythic unexpected is it teaches you to be self-reliant in ways you aren't expecting to be. Like I found in myself almost this old Arthur figure, this old ancient knight that just was fearless. It was like the dragons were attacking, and you don't know how to fight a dragon, but you are vigilant and you do whatever you can to show up. So you go out into the wind, you take your fire extinguisher, once we got fire extinguishers, and you start putting out fires around the neighborhood, and it's just, and the winds come up, and enough of that.
And then you have a painting called Phoenix, and that's the one that goes into where exactly. All the cards that you created?
This is where, I have to say, there's part of me that has a lot of, I realized, it's like, I heard, I was sitting in this, and I heard inwardly, you humans try way too hard. It's not supposed to be this difficult. The sense that we really are really serious, and if we looked at it a little more lightly, it's not taking it less seriously, but sort of like the storm on the horizon. If you're not like, you're going to be a little bit more relaxed, which will allow you to be more natural and respond rather than, in a sense, be tense and sort of helpless. Right. And a lot of, like with the Phoenix, it's amazing to me because the symbolism is extraordinary, because the Phoenix, of course, is from the fire. There is the blossoming. And this is what my painting Phoenix Arise shows in card form. And that's what's amazing, because it's a message. It is a message because it tells us these stories as a fractal, mathematical, geometrical iteration of the one, creation. And so even on those levels, it's saying, if you notice what I'm built of, my first principle is creation. Creation is given to all life. Life begins to unfold with unique geometry, but it's never incomplete. It's always complete within its own context. And therefore, by the time you see the blossom, you realize what the story is not for the footprint to be realized, but the unfoldment of this design that says you are composed of the story that you are a phoenix. You're not born into time, you're born into creation. Your DNA, which the painting also reveals, it says to each of us that you're woven, you're an art form of creation, you're woven as a holographic entity, meaning your DNA as woman or man carries all conditions to one man and one woman, which is very extraordinary, because this really helps us understand how we can apply a lot of quantum physics and multidimensionality and realize it's not to sweep us off into a type of abstraction, but actually saying, no, why this painting tells us what it does in a fixed form, in the same way why the hieroglyph of the human soul or Thought's library is so important, is because with the 3D glasses, it says, I'm not in motion, I'm not tricking you. I'm saying, I am stable in this state, so trust it. In a way, you'd say, okay, the piano is stable. But now put the glasses on. Ah, look at me again. I'm a relationship. And that's when you'd say, play the piano keys, it might make some music. In other words, there's something between this relationship that allows us to understand the function of the form we've been creating for so long. And that's why Phoenix Arise like the hieroglyph, takes us back to first times. It's a painting, which is our first language. And it's also a painting done as an act of love and devotion and inquiry, not illustration. So it's much more, as our ancients would say, yeah, this is why I painted, why I went into the cave, was I wanted to commune with these other creatures that didn't speak what I spoke. But like family, we realized family, we did not just want to take, but we had to create. Think of a mind relationship. We had to imagine, empathize our story together because we had a sense of non-separation from one another. And yet now with the Phoenix, and this is what's so important, is it's saying that, like the Maya prophecy, which says we've entered the fifth world, which is the age of flowers. These flowers of the Phoenix say you are flowering. Human consciousness is flowering. But where this flowers is uniquely in domestic space, because this is my home, and it was not painted for others. It was painted as an act of devotion and inquiry, as in ancient times. How may I know creation without creation? How may I know love without loving? So if I seek to know these things, I do not seek to illustrate them, I seek to awaken them and to allow them to mentor me.
And that's the experience with when you take people on a tour, and the way that you describe it, and the metaphors of the positioning of, you know, your artwork, like, you know, Sophia with the higher and lower shelf, and yes, the stuff that's on the shelf. And then, you know, you walk a little to the left, and then there's the mirror, and then you look in the mirror, you put the hands on. So tell us just a little bit about this tour you take people on and how it tells that story. And I can say firsthand that when he does this, it's like one's consciousness is blossoming all at the same time, and just the reawakening of these parts of ourselves that for some have gone dormant, and how that relates to, you know, this larger picture that we're in. Yeah, can you just kind of tell us a little bit about that tour you take people through and all these different stages in that journey?
Yeah, because one of the great gifts I've been given is, because I've been working on it for 18 years, and before that the tarot, is it's been an ongoing, in a way, story that's been developing through me, a garden that's been growing, and as it has, it's become, to a great degree, simpler. You know, in a way, it's almost like the tarot was all sorts of different parts, and then it became a wheel, it became an instrument. And that's why when people come, the first thing I love to tell them, because we're upstairs, is I say, well, let's ascend. We're going to ascend, but we're not going to leave home. And a great deal of the story that I like to point out, and I find this very ironic, of course, that there was a tornado that came to my door, because oftentimes I use the story of the Wizard of Oz, because there's a downstairs studio, and then there's an upstairs studio. The downstairs studio was the garage, which I transformed into a room for my father. So we have the father's room. And this is also where downstairs the tarot is. I have all of my 22 drawings lining the walls. And so it's illustrative theater. In a sense, it's immersive theater, because as we come in off the street to the studio below, into the room of the father, we see the tarot. And the question of the father is, well, Dad, what's the difference between things? And the father says, well, before you leave home, interestingly enough, it takes me 17 years, like we leave for college when we're 17, right? He says, well, before you leave home, you're going to have to learn the difference between things. You're going to have to understand the Empress is not the devil, but the world, like Kansas for Dorothy, has all of its characters. So it's not who you like or don't like, it's how do you navigate? How do you understand it's not your reaction, but your, in a sense, navigation, as I say. And then we begin to go upstairs. I take them from the archetypes. And I also point out a very important truth, is I say here, the archetypes return home. Here they return because there has been not simply myself, but community that has welcomed these questions, these conversations, and allowed me, again, like a gardener growing a hybrid garden, to ask questions about archetype, to do it with art that led me deeper and deeper, and then to also read my rough draft on Thursday night in the discussion group, then to go back and rewrite it, read the book, and to really have it as a type of Aquarian conversation, meaning I have to do the work, but it's not coming from my sort of Piscean need to be a messiah and tell you what you need to know, but much more the Aquarian sense of an ensemble group, like great jazz musicians saying, man, I love that riff. Of course, I've got to talk about that. Didn't see that. You know, and this is why that sense of community downstairs creates the foundation. And I think that that mirrors a lot of what we went through in the 80s. That in the 80s, you could say there was there's still this belief and hope for politics, the hope for institution, the hope for maybe if we're lucky, you know, and what of course, the collapse of the buildings are going to give us is this collapse of that world, those expectations. But they've created the foundation below. And that's why when people come upstairs, I say, note that we're going to cross the domestic plane, meaning if we go into the middle part of the house, we go into the family room. But let's ascend, let's go up into the upstairs studio, and this upstairs studio is a library. And this is important because why, as we ascend in this story into the arc of the human imagination. We ascend into the living library and the story that we are woven of the whole and holy question of what does it mean to be human. And the heroism, the nobility of who we truly are is in our willingness to be born, to never know why, to never know how, to never know what, and yet to do it, to endure it, and to not quit when everything is saying quit. And this is why I feel this reverence now, and I try to have people feel it when they ascend. I say, I want you to stand in the heroic truth of your ancestors. That when they were creating these stained windows, they were losing their family to plague or war. Do you know that we've always had something that has been tragedy on the horizon? But we see that we don't use that as the marker of who we are. We use that as the marker of, there's only so much time. What will I devote my life to? And when you see that all of the books that surround us are those that say yes instead of yikes or no, they say, you know what, I'm tormented. No one ever buys my art, but I love these sunflowers. Maybe someday somebody will like them, because nobody even likes me. You know, this is where these come from. You know, you see this anguish in the books, and you start to realize that stop turning us into mythic beings. We're human. You know, we did it because we didn't want to die of despair. We don't want you to die of despair. And so stop telling your neighbor what he or she needs to know. Stop arguing on what side of the Titanic you want to stand. You know, the problem's bigger than that. The problem is, where do you live? You know, this is what I tell them. I say, so let's start where we live. Let's think like an ensemble, an acting group. Let's think like theater rather than religion. Theater says, I need your character. I know you're the bad guy, but you know what? It's going to trigger my good guy. It's going to make me work twice as hard. And my other thing, if everything were cozy, I'd be very lazy. So this is why we're subjected to these things. And that's what I try to point out. In the library, the librarian would not say, oh, yes, let me burn those books. You don't like them, that's right. Oh, you don't like that God? Well, I'm in the library. So you know what? All the gods are here. So it's the custodian of the truth that the chalice of human wisdom is not one book, but all of its books. Just like the DNA, if we are each part of this living weave, it'd be like the left hand denying the right hand. And this is what, when we're in art, and it's immersive, art does say, your arts are where you're generous. Your arts are where you say, you know what, lighten up. Let's sing a bit. Let's dance. Because if we do, we're going to stop thinking about the things that make us angry. We're going to start thinking about the things that we love. And I think with this sense of so much on the horizon, I think it's time we turn our attention toward those that care. And that's what I do. I always say, I want you to take a moment and understand, if you're standing in this magical library, you took time out of your precious day. You didn't stay comfortable. You took a chance. You showed up. So look at each other. And when you're feeling, oh, the world doesn't care, remember these people, because like you, they care. And like you, they feel that no one cares either. But if we start looking at each other and saying, I care, you care. That's why we're such good friends, Laura. I know you care, and I know you know I care. So we're really like gardeners. We're like a couple of planters saying, you know what? A lot has to do with the seasons and this and that, but we're here to plant seeds, to be the custodians of the reasons why. It's never been about getting out of anything. And ascension really wouldn't be about leaving. That's the other thing I'd say. In the library, it says, because there's the right angle. And this is where we see Christ. We see the Father, this story of the journey into the mirror of self-reflection, or this hemisphere of I think, therefore I am. Because in reflection, I think I'm not you. When I look in the mirror, I think I'm me. I don't think I'm you. But with the other story of I love, therefore I am, which is Sophia, Philo-Sophia, wisdom, I realize we are one. And this is what we've been divided by as human beings. When we think, we separate. When we feel, we connect. And it is how do we find union? And that's why I think it's very important that this story, again, is showing Thoth's library. You think of as above, so below, this ancient story. He would say, this is why you left the mother goddess. That the domestic was always there, and the stories always connected us. But our question was, what if we could create unique separation, go into time, and like an electron, slow the story down? That's my dog breathing heavily. You hear it in the background. And that's the other thing I say in the library, is that Einstein really helps us understand the nature of the books. Because he says reality is thought slowed down to a rate where we can perceive it. And the ancient ones that are here, like Tor, the divine progenitor, these figures with this elongated head, tell me that about 18.5 million years ago, we created a smaller head. Because this elongated head essentially functions at the speed of light. And so all of our knowledge was about alignment, stargates. That's why these ancient geometrical relationships with the stars, where you'd say like radios, literally to walk in and to amplify the holographic resonance field. But we knew that essentially if those obelisks were up, if we couldn't get Moses away from the pyramids, we would always be about alignment. And so the question was, how do we knock over, how do we slow this light of mind down? And that's why the hieroglyph is really important, because it's pictures telling us this. We can even see it. And as you said, we can even walk it, which is why I feel this must be really trying to say, I want you to understand that your humanity is essentially taking what you used to think of as Akashic knowledge, universal knowledge, and humanizing it. Meaning so that you find with the poetry of Boehme, in a sense, the intimacy of that spirituality, or Rilke, or the sense of a deeper humanity that opens your heart more than the golden precepts of star knowing that really don't make any sense to us anymore. Any more than a lot of these things that were built that we look at and go, well, I don't think we're as smart as we used to be. And it's true, because we saw with vastness. And the question was, we wanted to explore the nature of intimacy. And to do that, we had to forget. And that's what the right angle's about. If you think of the light this way, and then bending the light, and you think of all the Egyptians with the right angle, the Masons with the right angle, it's because it's saying this is the right angle. Meaning that what we've been developing is a tool, a quality of consciousness. And this is the great gift. It said, imagine, I want to ask you a question. That's what the hieroglyph does. And I have people stand at the threshold and I say, in ancient times, you were asked, are you willing to explore the nature of what does it mean to be human? And we said, well, what does that mean? And then we heard, well, we don't know, we've never done it. Are you willing to do it? Because it can't be done if you're not willing to live it. In the old times, we could think about it, but this was, no, we're going to actually live these questions. We're not going to escape any of the ramifications. So by the time we're truly home, we will have earned our humanity. A bit like Job in the Bible, we will still love in spite of every reason. Do you see? The curse. And that's when we stand up, no longer shouting at our neighbor, but realizing, like ancient trees, as I look at you and you look at me, we are of untold ancients. So it's to trust this truth, to not be afraid of what's going on, but to understand that this sharing is what seeds the possibility of things, because I know now that the Piscean model of mind wanted a Messiah and a parent to show up. And this is why we always responded to authority patting us on the head or saying no. And then we found, as it started to change, in a way, the corruption of that, but also within ourselves, giving up our power to a parental consciousness. And this is why the Watchers, going back to the language that the hieroglyphs have written, they say, we do not interfere. We will not intrude. You would not like that, because then you would think there are others you have to please once again. you would be convinced it's not you that has to draw this out of yourself. But no, we are your synchronicities, your poetry, your fragrance, the things you can't see that remind you that no matter how strange life is, there are those moments where you think, wow, it kind of makes sense. And of course, it flies away like a butterfly, but in that moment. And that's what they say, that's the nectar. We don't realize this yet because we're always running, trying to get somewhere. We're never home. That's the story of this art. It's almost like saying, slow down. Once it's not about leaving and it's about staying, you realize that many of the things you had no time to hear in that seeming silence will calm your heart because they're old friends you just didn't listen to. And that's the creative spirit. It's not about being creative. It's about having a relationship with the deeper love of things. Because you look around at life and you think, whether it's ants, whether it's trees, whether it's anything, everything struggles. You know, everything fights against this unknown. But in that, there's a deep beauty. You know, and I rather think that that's what we're trying to, almost like, I feel this way. If everything were to end, you know what? I'm glad I was part of this human story. I almost feel like a cheerleader of the human story now, because it's going, guys, we're parked out on a little planet in the outskirts of nowhere because we're like nitroglycerin. We blew up, we caused a lot of damage, so they keep us off like a really healthy, interesting experiment. Because if you think about, we have to grow the foundation. That's what this heart and this home is saying. We have to grow the foundation that realizes that every part of the journey is essential. That all qualities and conditions, from the neighbors we like to those we don't like, are really just the waters we're navigating of a conversation of community in the world. But when we pull back to where we live and where we love, we are as ancient trees that say, close your eyes, go into the roots of your knowing, and you realize you are not suffering these things aimlessly. You're suffering them humanly. And it's your turn to live this experience, to not escape it, to not run from its difficulties thinking, oh, if I could only be comfortable, but to turn much more into it like a mental martial art lesson that teaches you what is yours and what you do no longer need to pay attention to. And we're in a world of fear that is teaching us quite deeply what to pay attention to. In my work on tarot, I like to point out the tarot archetypes are called trumps. I created 22 trumps. Also in General Hospital, I modeled a character after Donald Trump. So there's this deeper sense of a deeper humor going on because the 16th key of the tarot is the Trump Tower. And this is Mars, and the man is orange. So what the story in this mythic drama is saying, everything's gonna make you angry because Mars goes, be angry, be angry, be angry, be angry, be angry. But if you think of that again as a martial art going, oh, wait a minute, I was giving my anger over there, and it was drawing me out of myself. That's why I say, like when people stand at the mirror, I say, okay, you see yourself, and you see me, you don't realize I'm behind you. You think I'm in front of you in the mirror. And if you were to throw something to try and hurt me, it'd hit the mirror. It'd come right back on you. And that's what's happening with anger. It's coming right back on people. So this is why, again, with my book, Judgment, the Archetype of the Baptism of Fire, is very important to know about now. These are energies that are not soft and kind and gentle and will bring about transformation or drown us. It's, you know, that's why I built an ark. So they didn't listen to Noah either.
Yeah, gosh. And oh gosh, right. So when people really feel into that victim energy, maybe they lost a loved one or just something really tragic happened in their life. I mean, this is what you're really speaking to right now, which is so important for people to hear. And maybe for somebody to see it through that viewpoint, you know, that beauty can step forth and we can begin to lift that veil to see that much larger picture that this whole journey in your house, you know, really, you know, symbolizes. And so when you think of those that are transitioning and where we're heading as a human race and what changes are in front of us, without it being predictive, what are you sensing that your art has shown and just your intuition on that?
I
resolve some of that kind of.
Yeah, I really do believe that the story that the last flood was water, this is information. And that the fury that got us to the coast, essentially the rage of ages. And I look at it this way. I tell people, I'm the white guy on Indian land. So my job is not to keep running because I have blood on my hands, but to actually look down and say, well, what is my part of this? And what was extraordinary was a year to the day of the fire that came here, I was in Cambodia in the killing fields, and I was overwhelmed on a soul level with the heart of darkness. And it informed me, don't look at me. This is not what this is about. But the human story is about in spite of this. So it said, look at the children, look at the love in the eye. Dude, start looking at the people, start looking at life, not this other quality. And it told me that because, and it said, these are not your tears, because there are millions of beings in the earth, I mean, in the killing fields that have been murdered in the most tremendous ways. And you feel it. And so you want to grieve. And it said, stop. These are not your tears. These are their tears. Yours is to witness. And I got it. I said, yes, let me be a sentry. Let me leave a part of myself as witness. And I did. And I feel that that's important. It helped me understand the nature of the library and the Shumash land I'm on. That I can't change the history, nor in a sense excuse the blood that was let with this devouring ego that said, if you have what I want, I will take it from you. And if you are weaker than me, I will dominate you over and over and over again until we get to the coast. And that's why it even symbolically was so astounding that the fire reached here on not 9/11 this time, but 11/9. I'd spent 17 years on the tarot. I had spent 17 years on the hieroglyph of the human soul. And so not 9/11, but 11/9, which was also 2 years to the day of the election of the Mars Trump. So you think of fire, you know, in a sense, this fury, neighbor against neighbor, neighbor hating neighbor, suspicious of neighbor. But then community disappears because no one's keeping an eye on anything. And this happened literally all over. And that's why I feel that it's humbling us. It's bringing us to the point of understanding that we are now being as to be, because I thought about with the fire, and then with Leighton was a very difficult, traumatic, near-death experience for my daughter and her. And then I was diagnosed with possible cancer. So, and then my extraordinary favorite cat was killed by a kite. So there were all these layers, and I thought either I can look at this as it's been a traumatic year, or to realize, no, wait a minute, like a martial art, it's teaching me, Leigh, everyone has these layers of trauma. Ask them. Listen, has something showed up at your door like a fire you're not expecting that you've had to deal with? You don't know whether to run or stay? Yeah. Okay, let me ask you, has anybody in your family had physical trauma, been hurt, or have you been worried about, yeah. Or how about you? Have you had a diagnosis in health that scares you? Have you had to change your diet? Have you had, yeah, have you lost an animal recently? You know, and you start looking around and you think, no one is being spared of this. And that's why I understand now that if we don't look at these things victimized, oh, I'm victimized by them, but realize, well, yes, to a certain degree, they're affecting you. But once you understand, a bit like Buddha, really, you know, the life is suffering, but you realize, no, wait a minute. This trauma, and that's why I started to think about the parable of the mustard seed with Buddha, this idea that, you know, bring the mustard seed of a family that has not known grief. And there is no, you know, there's no such thing. And to me, that's where we start to lower our eyes away from the reflective surface of the difference with our neighbor into the deeper humanity of understanding that most of those things come from a very frightened heart. You know, a very scared sense that I don't know what to do, so I'll protect myself. And that's what I do. I feel like only story, only art, only the place. That's why I love this being intimate space. And I love Mothership being at home, because she would say, I can't talk to you unless I come home with you. I'm your mom, right? I love you. And that's not kind of, you're woven of me. Think about that, love. I mean, people would feel far less victimized because they'd say, no, if I'm being held by this matter, mother, then I can be far more bold and daring, because I realize I'm not, that human beings don't get out of the adverse conditions. It is alchemical here, not religious, not spiritual. You know, I always feel like anything I could pretend to be isn't the way. You know, it has to grow into something that moves me in ways I'm not expecting. Otherwise, I'm just giving something that I expect. You know, but
yeah, the labeling and
yeah, but trauma is what I think everyone's dealing with right now.
oh yeah, yeah, and people tend to isolate and not recognize, just like you said. It's you could ask a question to pretty much anybody. Where has that not happened? I mean, it's the cycles of our history as well, and that the alchemical part is huge. And it's interesting. I really love your Fool card, and when we look at the number 0, maybe and I just have a few more, because I could talk to you forever, and I want to respect your time. But the 0 card, I always gravitate towards that energy of 0, and maybe you could talk about that archetype and how uplifting that vibration can be, being a no number energy. And I just love the art on your particular deck as well, that with the black sun, right? And the
yeah, absolutely. No, you're absolutely on it, because I started to realize with the tarot that if you see this, and this is why I have people put the cards around them in a circle, and I say, all right, I want you to imagine that the circle begins to spin. Now as it spins, it becomes like a gyroscope. It holds you. So no matter what you give yourself passionately to the imagination in the library or the characters in the story, you won't be swept away. You'll, like a gyroscope, be able to find that balance, come back up. And this is really the Fool archetype, that 0 archetype, which also is extraordinary to think about, the hub of the wheel around which all of these qualities turn. And if you think about this eye, you see this open eye of wonder that we enter the world with, or the shishum, this quality that goes like a line all the way through us. And we think of this as the axis or the medius currens, meaning that around which these qualities turn. The Fool, and this is why I think so deeply now that we really relate to the 0. The 0 is the pupil of the eye, because the pupil of the eye in you is the pupil of the eye in me. What unfolds around that purple, like the mandala of the phoenix, is a unique blossom, a unique life expression. So we can find that place of pure vision. We are fearless because we're no longer in time. We are able to see time, but able to draw from the conditions that, or the eye that sees all things simultaneously, which is that trust of the Fool. You know, and this is one of the things I feel so strongly now. It is, we're being asked to trust on that level, meaning step in, don't know, but realize that everything around you is not static, but actually in motion. And that the spin of things is beginning to lift you in ways you should be a fool to think about. You should give up in a way you're wise, having figured it out, and step into the not knowing. And that's why even the book, it's the last line. I say that the wisdom of the Fool is live vibrantly, be free. This is the wisdom of the Fool. Drink deeply. And you think, live vibrantly. And so much of the condition, and that's the question, if you don't feel safe, it's hard to live on the outside in a vibrant condition because you're guarded. So the question the Fool asks, if you have to get naked, where are you going to do it? If you have to close the door in a surveillance society and no one watches you, where are you going to do that? If you have to be a gardener and say, you know what, I'm growing hybrid here, I don't really need your opinion, thank you very much, where are you going to do that? Because so many of these things need us to be wise custodians now. They need to say, you know what, it wasn't the inner child, it's human innocence. We're the custodians of wonder. So where do you feel a sense of wonder? Feel that, feel it in your body, remember how it feels. Bring this into the story of depression. In other words, we start to use these things as that which begins to leaven or dissolve our resistance to our own greater energies. And we're doing it. That's why I think it's extraordinary. And I really just want to honor what you've been doing and talking and really inspiring people to think about the world in ways that they do not think about, maybe they can't think about. Once they do, they start to see beyond the old assumptions. And I think this is very important. So, you know, I want to say to a fellow gardener and custodian of these things, it's not watching the outcome. It really is being true to, as an artist of consciousness, these things matter to me. So I'll tell them to those that might care about these things. But if the others don't, it's not my job to convince them, because these people are already beginning to say, let's honor these thoughts. And that's what birthed Renaissance. It was never many people. It was enough individuals saying, I'm inspired when I think like this. And if I'm inspired, that will draw others. You know, if the music is good, the people will come. So, and I think that that's what we're on. We're on the ground with the seed planters, the seed sowers, and the fool says, so live vibrantly, be free, dare, you can never know. But that's how you survive the most impossible storms. Because essentially we want to run, but don't. Be foolish enough to turn around and stand your ground and say, I love here. This matters to me. And if I start with that power and that strength, I don't have to self-doubt. I know. It's only when I take on my neighbor's opinions that I start to doubt.
Right. Totally. That's so well put too. Gosh. Everything you share. Gosh. So before we close, can you tell us a little bit about the Codex Tour? Because that's a very significant part of your work.
Yeah, that actually sort of is a part of the tool that opened up the hieroglyph, because I bound books in a bookbinding class and spent 24 years creating 2 volumes of a journey of the Codex Tour. And I used my brush and my pen as a way of asking questions about the nature of consciousness, multidimensionality, and essentially allowed it to become my guide and mentor. But it turns out that Tour turns out to be this entity of a much more ancient universe. And so they became the handbooks of a new awakening, because our old handbooks were explanations. You need to learn, you need to teach. But this was about offering that which was to trigger, like the art does here, deeper memory. Because everything in these books, the Codex Tour, say, you're done. It's not about learning more. It's like the libraries here. It's saying you've offloaded all the information. So don't worry about studying. I want you to trust the instrument. So the Codex Tour become this trusting the instrument, trusting the deep, active imagination, and they move into languages and all sorts of worlds and act as a way, I know now, of energetically reconnecting parts of the pattern recognition parts of the brain that are very ancient. And once they see the data, it starts to, like the file lights up, so to speak. So the Codex will light up files. That's what like the hieroglyph does. That's why at the end of the day, part of this is I love talking about it, and I love the tour, and but I also love the silence of it, because that's that deeper relationships that's saying, now I want you to trust, not this is just art and it's an illustration of a fantasy, but no, this is a science of deep inquiry that, much like Leonardo, uses a brush and a pen to ask the questions that can't be asked otherwise. If we're going to understand the nature of multidimensionality, we must have the phoenix arise. We must, if we understand the nature of transdimensional energies, have the hieroglyph, because there is no machinery involved, no AI. There is nothing being done for us. We are the primary technology. This is essential. We're being trained to say we need other technology, which is nonsense. And that's why this art is about pattern recognition. The Codex Tour is about pattern recognition. And what's fascinating is when Flying Lotus, Steve Ellison, but he's a brilliant musician, about 10 years ago for his album Cosmogramma, took from my Codex Tour a number of different images. And I saw him making my art into art. It wasn't as though, oh, he's just illustrating. And that's when I understood the language. He even chose for this album, unbeknownst to him, the section that was on Music Beyond Notes. And that the gatefold of the album is actually the awakening of the Aquarian mind, or the energies of perception. So the whole point of this letter from the cosmos, that is the name Cosmogramma, that is between a musician and the artist, you know, in a sense, the visual and the tonal, but this alchemical process of, and I even did the text, and it was only the names of the musicians that did the calligraphy. And I realized it's brilliant, because he didn't tell you what you're hearing. He said, it's art. Listen, it's art. Look. And that's what I feel we're at. It's almost like the theater of it. Enough with the audience's study of the play and what they think. I'd give it a 6. Shut up. Get on stage. Be part of it. The conversation is what is necessary. You know, this is the quantum truth. Quantum energy is not abstract. It's imagination. And it says, if you want to change things, you must enter the imagination. And like an actor showing up going, I'm not putting the play on myself, but I'm going to trust my character. As strange as this character might be, I think the play's telling me it needs me. And the other actors are trying to say, of course we do. Otherwise, we'd think the play was about us. We're starting to understand together it's about the play. You see, this is what changes. And then we look at each home and each individual and say, I honor the universal wholeness, holiness of who and what you are. You are not born into time, but creation. You are a unique being that embodies all of these stories. But the gift is, now you can tell your story as well. And when my dad died, I always go back because I saw his book squeezed and it was put on the shelf proudly, and it said, now it's been lived. And I thought, that's us. We're willing to live these things and to, in a way, take the adventure. So that's why I do. I know we're in a transformational state. It's getting us away from generalized thinking to looking at things in a lens that says, I can't take care of the world, but I can navigate it.
Oh, totally.
You see?
Oh,
otherwise, it's fair of me, and I don't like that.
Right.
You know? And that's the zen of it. What are you paying attention to? And the arts say, pay attention to that which makes your heart say yes. It allows you to breathe, which allows your mood to lift. And when your mood lifts, your eyes lift and your sense of wonder opens, and who knows what's possible.
Yes.
And we're all dealing with this. So it's not like we have good days, bad days. But,
right.
You know, it's like, yeah.
Yeah, this co-creation. And sometimes I see it, you know, as a sailor, it's like we can't control the wind or the waves, but we have the rudder and we have the sails to just try and work with it as best as we can.
Exactly.
And yeah, you've been just one of the most unbelievable people that I've ever met. And I know, you know, the influence and inspiration that you've had on my life. I actually have a link on my website so that people can be more introduced to your art.
Oh,
and so I'll, you know, make sure that people, you know, get to see that. And just one, well, it's hard to narrow it down, but the Lilith energy in some of these archetypes, when we look at a lot of the demonization of the feminine or different parts of that fullness of what, you know, these different archetypes represent, would you be able to speak a little bit to the misunderstanding of Lilith and how people can maybe reacquaint themselves with some of these lost aspects of the goddess?
What really taught me about Lilith, because I wasn't expecting, that's the thing, and a lot of these revelations, I was not expecting to tell the story of this particular goddess or this particular archetype. So Lilith appeared on the back of another canvas, which is a very telling sign about Lilith, meaning that she is that which is hidden, that which cannot be seen. And she's a very sensual, my Lilith is a very sensual, very erotic, veiled figure that emerges. And she says, I dissolve the illusion of the illusion. If I am outward, you will never believe you are separate. And she begins to tell a very interesting story about the relationship of where we are now and the time of the goddess. Because Lilith essentially is also the need, ultimately, to make sense of what happened to that power. Because whether it's Kali or Lilith or a volcano or an earth eruption, Gaia, her power is so obvious. You know, what was the diminution of the feminine? And my friend Drew Joy was a wonderful teacher who passed, but we were talking in the Hieroglyphic a number of years ago, and we're both saying, really, there had to be some type of agreement for these energies to back off. And really the question was, well, what was the reason? And in this two-sided painting, interestingly enough, it starts to suggest a remarkable story of the sacrifice of the goddess. That Lilith is essentially, in our narrative historically, the end of the age of the worship of the goddess. Because when she is outward, we do not and cannot believe we are separate. But we're going to create that right angle, in a sense, create that kink. We're going to turn away from love into the direction of self-reflection. So she then, in the mythic narrative in the hieroglyphs, says, in ancient times, I turned myself inward. I did not die any more than the roots of a tree die. but you could no longer see your roots. So your inner sense of who and what you are is in darkness, and that sense of power doesn't seem to have any particular sense of direction. So she tells a really remarkable journey that as she turned herself inward, and this is over the spines of my family photo albums, and there's this wonderful umbilical apple serpent, this sense of the tree of life, growing up over my family photo albums. And it started to tell me the story that family photo albums indicate our ancient story, like the living tree. That as family, if you're sick, I'm sick, because we heal together. We do ritual together. So our symbols are all living symbols. They don't become the dead cross. That's when we move away from love and into self-reflection, when we move away from feeling connected to feeling that I'm not where I should be, and hopefully once I die, I will go to where I need to go. You know, and that's what Lilith is trying to say. She says now that I turn myself inward so that you could blossom. So this also involved betrayal, because Adam and Eve in this narrative needed to be born innocent of who and what they once were. Because who and what they once were with these great minds were cosmic beings. Their love was universal. So the question was, with Adam and Eve, how do we both forget what we once knew? We'll be composed of that knowing, so there'll be this lingering sense of, I kind of remember, but I can't go there. And because of that, Adam and Eve in the story are told that you must create small fires of intimacy so that you survive the cold night and the darkness that you cannot know. And we start to understand, oh, then our human story begins to kindle small fires of survival. Love is not something grand and cosmological and golden and full of pyramids and obelisks. It's going to lead to the linoleum world, essentially, meaning this seeming curse of ordinariness. But we're going to realize that actually it's the journey of ourselves through our willingness to be born. And that's what Lilith, as she reappears now, she says, I've always been present, but hidden until you return home. The goddess cannot be known in another person's home. She must be known because I am your roots. Now think about woman, right? If you want to know who you are, discover the goddess in the floorboards in the ground upon which you live and love. Your goddess is in your love of your children, that fierceness that has no indecision about things. I will protect this because I love. Now, if you think of that not personal, but the lioness saying, I love, this is the Lilith energy. She says, I became the lion in Eve's heart, because when Adam, think of ourselves as Adam and Eve, male and female, as our masculine turned toward the mirror of self-reflection, we became infatuated with the belief that there was somewhere to go, because in self-reflection, I see myself in the other room. I see myself there. And as we turned away from I love, therefore I am. So as Adam turns back in this narrative, he sees woman, he sees the gift of life, but he can no longer see, because it's a right angle, the mother. He can no longer see the ancestors, nor understand the chalice of wisdom. He feels abandoned by these ancient ways and has to take this long journey into the mirror of self-reflection, only in the narrative here to reach the mirror and to realize it wasn't about actually getting anywhere. It was to finally develop a human form that, in its despair of not being connected, in its need to make small fires just to survive, it finally finds itself in this story of a ranch style house on linoleum, meaning that the curse is, oh, I thought I'd be golden and I'm fighting low self-esteem, I'm not fighting dragons, what's this about? But then you say, oh, well, wait a minute, that's what we've been doing. We've been slowing down this great knowing into the human condition to finally do what Home says. In the human condition, you have to take your kids to school, you have to pay your bills, you have to figure, you know, it's not like, oh, you think so well, you know. And part of that, and my joke is, but it's true, I say, when your cosmology is at home, your wife looks at you blankly and says, take out the trash. And you realize that's what the creative spirit wants. Get off your scaffolding, get off your high horse, stop thinking these fascinating ideas of yours are what the world is waiting to hear. It's not. They're waiting to be heard by you and your sense of wonder, so that maybe you can add something to the dark glass. But don't think it's to add to the dark glass and it'll change the world. The world's like the ocean. It just keeps coming. It's for us to navigate it and not take it so personally. And that's what I believe we are learning.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, you know, it's like the Bhagavad Gita, right? It's like Arjuna and Krishna. Arjuna, you know, Krishna says, you must take up arms, because Arjuna is grieved for it. I can't take arms against my own family. And he says, you must see through the illusion. And I think that's where we're at. And when you're at home and when you're with Lilith, she tells you, and this is very important, she says, I devour narcissists. They're terrified of me because I see through the house of cards. And this is why what's going on right now is an exaggeration, almost a caricature of the gasps of patriarchy, because I go back to the Twin Towers falling as the end of the age of patriarchy, meaning no longer will there be a hearty enough erection of either money or God to give us a conceit that we're getting something. We're on our knees, and in that case, there's nowhere to go. And my story now is, so in the meantime, whether it goes well or poorly, let's gather. Let's realize that we've always transformed ourselves by the stories we're willing to tell. And art is the place in community that's generous. It doesn't instruct us, it inspires us to join in, to breathe. And if you find yourself feeling like you're in the audience, go out, go to a sound bath, go to a community that says, no, let's chant together, let's sing together, let's dance together. Community heals. That I know you know, and boy do I know that here, is that that's what we need to offer each other, not judgment or how-tos. The library's here, everything's been offloaded. So it really is, the instruments are here. Let's sit with the instruments and play and not judge the music, but know that we have to find safe space. Otherwise, we'll think the judgment of the world is real. And that's like thinking the ocean hitting our vessel is real. It's there, but it's telling us to not lean toward it, but lean into what we're meant to be guided toward and trust it.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Yes. I just want to close with just that balance of the masculine and feminine, the Christ-Sophia. And I know Sophia isn't something that people have been raised to really understand. And when you talk about Philo-Sophia and we hear about the Christ-Sophia and that template, what can you tell us about that inner blueprint that we carry? And I'll make that the last question, just so you're...
Oh, well, yeah, but well, we can do a mini-series, I don't mind.
Oh, yeah, please, oh my goodness.
But no, I feel that Sophia, see, like Lilith, Sophia was not expected. And so as she emerged in my studio, she emerges from the floor, from the waters, onto the cabinet. She creates a right angle herself, essentially rising out of the depths. And she started to tell me a story. This is why I was surprised, because yeah, Sophia is in mystic Christianity, there's in Judaism and in the Zohar, there's Sophia, in alchemy, there's Sophia. So you have Anima Mundi, the great mother, you know, and that's why it was interesting, because I had read a lot of different of the Gnostic texts and different things with Sophia. So it was very intriguing to see her emerge in this context and in the context of the Christ-Sophia, because she started to bear the truth. When we think of philosophy, she said, you misunderstand Philo-Sophia. Wisdom is not in one-upmanship or being smarter than someone else. But Philo-Sophia was like creating a beautiful meal. It was to nourish one another. And that, in a sense, delectableness of a beautiful idea, that would generate a greater blossoming effect, because it was very much about a natural relationship or natural Philo-Sophia. And this is an important element, I believe, of why her reoccurrence in the Hieroglyphic Human Soul is so important, is because she is the one that told me. She says, I have a flower on my chest, meaning that I love all of my children. You cannot know who you are until you realize that you are all of these things. A flower is not one petal, it opens as community. And that I love you, and that her belly is the face of the child. And so she has a pregnant belly. And she says that to be human is to be as a child. You do not remember who you are. And because of this, you have become ashamed. But I want to bring you home. I want to allow you to remember that it is human innocence that has always been that which takes you on your journey. And she then also then holds this relationship of what we think of as masculine and feminine energy. And she becomes the living waters that contain the entire library, because she will say, I am the knowledge of your atoms. I am all of these books. But the other point, and I think this is essential, because everyone feels really raw, you know, in a way like no one cares, no one. And I really feel when I'm here this profound sense that the Sophia energy, the great matter, mother, wants to wrap, like you'd say the studio is like a womb, a cosmic womb. It says, I want to hold you in your story, not so it's something dreadful and fearful, but something wondrous and remarkable, so that you're no longer afraid to participate, but you're finally standing in the center of where you love. And that's again why she appears then with this relationship to the ancestors to her left, who are looking back toward the stargates, and they are saying, we will retain this knowledge. We are your ancestors, but you will turn towards Sophia. And in this, you will take the journey of being born, not standing outside of the question, but by living the question, you will honor and earn the true love of Sophia. Because if you think of the mother, right? I'm an organism. I'm alive. I am your living DNA. I'm quite literally your weave. I give you the birth that you're woven of. You are woven of this energy. And she's connected then in this journey with this Christ in the hieroglyph, which of course, and I was not expecting him to emerge either, but the story he shows is this right angle. He's quite literally the heart at the right angle. And to the left is the mirror of self-reflection, and his eye on the left is blind. And it's saying the knowledge of the Father on the journey to the mirror of self-reflection, in other words, who am I, not who are you. When I look in the mirror, I'm me. He says that the blind eye of the law takes us on the journey of thought, and that self-reflection separates. So when we think, we separate. And you think of the right angle, so you think of the crucifixion, right? So the human being has been crucified between thought, which separates, and then the right eye, his right eye is open, which is the universal eye of love. So with the open eye of love, Sophia, the mother and father, are together. In essence, the love of the father and the love of the mother are what give birth to us. And even in the narrative here, it says, and we begin in that love, we begin in that direct connection, and then we take this journey of the right angle. And at the moment of the division of the heart, or of the two hemispheres of love and thought, we turn away from the open eye of love and the vulnerability into the blind eye of the law. And we as beings on this journey of ego, if we don't think about it personally, have been journeying through the knowledge of the separated self in order to reach a point where there's no further to go. And like Dorothy in Oz, she says, I want to be with the people I love. I don't care about the black and white. I just wanted to know there was more beyond the difficulty. And that's what the library gives us. It says, look, the difficulties in all the books. But like Dorothy, it's not about that. It's about realizing that let the black and white of your world be stimulated by a deeper transparency of the beings you're with. And once you allow this, your world will become enriched, not just to you, but you'll literally be enriching your world. And so this, I feel, is the Sophic emphasis, meaning I want to find my way home with you. I want to tell you I love you. And I feel when people are leaving, especially with the entity of the library, that this Sophia, it has wings, and she's wrapping them, saying, I couldn't hold you completely until you'd lived all of your books. Isn't that interesting? To think I couldn't hold you until your DNA was ready to know this love privately.
And that's what's so mind-blowing, the metaphors and the connections between just like the beam or the pine tree right where you're sitting. There's something about that too, just in the way that you describe the pine, right?
Exactly. We're born toward a world to be pined for. And we can't get there because here there's a railing in our way, but if we actually get what we pine for, there's also a really bad fall because we're on the floor here. And I love that philosophically, because it is a saying, listen, you've been deceived by this mirror and this world you pine for, and you think, I've got to get there. And believe me, everyone's at the mirror going, I can't get anywhere. Or they're at the railing, and I can't keep railing. I'm not getting anywhere. I think, do you see? And it says, all right, when that happens, turn around. Look at your own feet, your own souls, and realize, like trees, there's nowhere to get to. There's nowhere to run from. So trust the intimacy. Trust this linoleum, this ordinary, and realize it wasn't to have gold to work on. You're the gold. And I'm telling you, every musician, every artist, everyone that says, every gardener, every parent, I'd say, takes that and says, I've got to do something with this, and I'll learn from it. And if they're lucky, they really learn that they're part of a remarkable story that earns every bit of its moment by living, and not stepping out of even the most difficult situations.
Totally. Yeah, and that's the whole thing with the underworld too. It's that process of realization that takes us into the darkest place, but being the womb and being where we rebirth ourselves into the fullness of all that we really are, no matter how painful of a death it feels like. It just guides us into that blossom. It's like the soil, and that's the beauty of all these incredible just flowering energies and orbs and apples. And I mean, I got to tell you, everybody, I'm so glad to have the videos and the art set up in like a gallery so people can just like really view this, because everything that you're saying, I mean, people get walked through, all of it in art form. I mean, everywhere I go, pretty much, I'm like, you guys got to check this out.
So great. That's the way to do it.
and it has been ever since I met you. Gosh, I guess 2011 it was, 2010. Yeah, and it's just really been in my heart. And I always think about you guys. I love you and Carla. Just an incredible sacred union couple. And yeah, how many years has it been together?
41? No, 43.
Jeez.
Oh my God, let me see. 40, no, 41. 41 wow. Together, 43, 44 years. Yeah. It's a good beginning. And yeah, it's, and that's so important too, is I think just that, the key is honoring relationship on all levels, and the relationship we have with ourselves. And that's going back to Sophia. I really do feel like with mothership, it's not enlightenment, it's enlighten up. This revelation is in pink. Enough with the black and white ones. Stop the anger and the violence against what you don't like. Start leavening it. Start allowing it to lighten up. Breathe. Let it take you in a place that transmutes these energies into something that you can live with rather than undoes you. And together we'll do that, because we're all dealing with so much difficulty, so many different qualities. And that's why I think the mother is this story of intimacy, as the ancestors are, as the ancestral ground is here, saying, these things I probably have to whisper to you about. In other words, and I'm telling people now, if you have to shout, don't. Whisper. Those who are meant to hear will. We're in a time where it's not about reacting to the chaos. It's going lower than that and saying this is an extraordinary time to be planting these seeds and to be honoring one another's life journey.
Yeah,
we are an ensemble group, right?
Yeah.
Because you're attracting people to the conversation. I'm attracting people. And we're actually saying different people need to be fed by different sources, but we're all on the same page.
So is it like an orchestra? It's just like, let's just play music together. That's how I see it. I just want to be a part of the greater conversation. We're all a part of this greater conversation. What I love about these points you're making is the permission to be human. So many people put the pressure on themselves to be spiritual to the point where they lose their ground, they miss the mark, and to be able to just feel into the pain, feel into the alchemy, feel into, all of this, and recognize the child and that connection to the mother who loves us unconditionally. We're allowed to fall down and get back up again, which reminds me of the Fool too, without the judgment and the shame, like you've been saying about, shame. So, and this is just the richness of the fullness of all that we are, that you give us, you helped to remind what it's all about. And one of the most important things that I always think of, I believe in the power of the human spirit. I fully and completely do. And it is a very powerful and personal journey to return to that connection. And we just really have to hold space for that authentic initiation, I guess you could say. But
yeah, and honor it when we find ourselves doing it. That's the other, take a moment of breath and just honor the energy, that this is the way, what we're interested in. As we become expressive of that interest, these energies are interested in us. And in the same way that no painter or musician knows how to resolve a problem up front or optically, it comes from the very willingness to go through the process, you know, to, in a sense, enter into that that relationship. So that's why I think together we're going to realize that it was no big thing. It was something very intimate. It was this question of, can we speak as humans? No longer needing to have white robes or funny names. And if we do, that's fine too. You know, it's not a judgment, but it's to say that's part of your theater in a way. You know, in the best sense of the word, like my home, like your home, it's a different theater, you know, and so we're going to, I really think, honor those different things and enjoy the sense that we are all the children of a
and I love that. I love that because it feels like families have been targeted, our relationship with our children, our relationship with ourselves, and what comes most natural and what our greatest instincts are screaming to us is the priority, is what we can just let go and focus on and nurture. And to me, that's what makes the world a beautiful place. The rest of it, eventually, one of the greatest life lessons is, what does it matter compared to the heart, to our family, our children, our mates? Yeah. I honor my husband so much, and I take it so seriously, the integrity of beyond responsibility, but the sheer joy of being able to share on a level of safety and integrity. Like, so, and you as a family embody that, and just all that pours through you. I just can't thank you enough for taking the time to be with me, and I'd love to do more. And so any ideas we might come up with?
I would love to as well, because I feel like this is what it's about, like my discussion groups. It's never been any one night or one thing. It's the willingness to keep these ideas honored. And that by doing it, things start to feed us. You know, we get away from our limited view, or it's only this or only that, to go, it's this as well. And that's why I feel with oxygenation, it's not to be breathed. It's I even say this with painting now. I say, when we paint, we capture breath. So painting is like a lung. So it wants to breathe us. It doesn't want to teach us. It's like music. It wants to dissolve our resistance to the possibility that the melody inside of us, once let loose, will fill in what life seems to be missing. And we're to supply that melody. So
yeah. Oh, that's great.
Thank you so much. And let's do this again. And in the meantime, just continue on doing what you're doing. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. Your family's beautiful.
Thank you. You as well. You mean so much to us and me. Yeah, it definitely life changer. I can't wait for people to just be introduced to you who have not discovered you yet. It's a revelation. So thank you so much, Leigh. I will send you a message here and get you this. And yeah, I'll be posting it soon. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in with us, and much love to you and your family. Bye, Leigh.
Bye.
Okay, bye.